So the United States Constitution wins again. Welcome to my channel, Outspoken Samantha. If you are new here, welcome. I would love it if you would hit that subscribe button right now. And if you're returning, welcome back. I truly appreciate your continued support, and I hope that you are subscribed as well, particularly if you are watching on Rumble, because we do need to support platforms that support free speech, and YouTube is not that. So you guys, I'm sure, heard that the Supreme Court struck down affirmative action in college admissions, basically saying that if you make these decisions based on race, then that is not constitutional, which is true. So according to an article in the New York Post, it says the Supreme Court struck down affirmative action programs at Harvard University and the University of North Carolina, ruling that both institutions were in violation of the 14th Amendment and federal civil rights law. The decision essentially ends the practice of overt racial consideration in higher education admissions and overturns for all intents and purposes the High Court's 2003 ruling in Greta versus Bollinger, which found that colleges could consider race as one factor in the admissions process to achieve a diverse student body. Eliminating racial discrimination means eliminating all of it, Chief Justice John Roberts wrote in the majority opinion, and the Equal Protection Clause we have accordingly held applies without regard to any differences of race, of color, or of nationality. It is universal in its application. And then Harvard decided to respond to this Supreme Court ruling. It says, following the Supreme Court ruling against affirmative action in college and university admissions, Harvard University, one of the nation's most prestigious institutions and one of the schools named in the case, responded with the argument that using race as a factor in the admission process is essential to academic excellence. In a statement released June 29th, Harvard said it would certainly comply with the court's decision, but also said it affirmed the principle that teaching, learning, and research depend on a community that includes people of many backgrounds, perspectives, and lived experiences. Because the teaching, learning, research, and creativity that bring progress and change require debate and disagreement, diversity and difference are essential to academic excellence. I just have to ask, do they mean that diversity of background, that you are fine with Christian conservatives or conservative opinions or people with traditional values? Because it seems like every time people like Charlie Kirk or Candace Owens or Riley Gaines try to come to these universities to speak to your students, they are shouted down by the students and the faculty because for some reason, without even saying a word, they are automatically labeled as being racist or bigoted or hateful in some way, as having hate speech, even though they haven't delivered a speech at all. And then it says, to prepare leaders for a complex world, Harvard must admit and educate a student body whose members reflect and have lived multiple facets of human experience. This statement said, no part of what makes us who we are could ever be irrelevant. Harvard must always be a place of opportunity, a place whose doors remain open to those to whom they have long been closed, or a place where many will have the chance to live dreams their parents or grandparents could not have dreamed. And I just have to say with this statement that they're saying, when they say no part of what makes us who we are could ever be irrelevant, to them, skin color is entirely who we are. And that's the basis for CRT. That's the basis for this woke ideology, that skin color is first and foremost the most important thing, and everything else comes secondary to that. Not only that, but you have to be someone who adheres to this ideology that skin color comes first. So to them, no part of who we are could ever be irrelevant. The first and most important factor is what we look like on the outside, and then consideration for whether or not these people actually qualified to be there. So that is why affirmative action has been detrimental to educational institutions. So then Ketanji Brown Jackson, the Supreme Court social justice, responded in exactly the way that we would expect. She said, with let them eat cake obliviousness, today the majority pulls the ripcord and announces colorblindness for all by legal fiat. But deeming race irrelevant in law does not make it so in life. And having so detached itself from this country's actual past and present experiences, the court has now been lured into interfering with the crucial work that UNC and other institutions of higher learning are doing to solve America's real world problems. who is causing those real world problems, especially based on race these days, Ketanji. No one benefits from ignorance. Although formal race-linked legal barriers are gone, race still matters to the lived experiences of all Americans in innumerable ways, and today's ruling makes things worse, not better. The best that can be said of the majority's perspective is that it proceeds ostrich-like from the hope that preventing consideration of race will end racism. Yeah, that's exactly what's going to end racism, Ms. Jackson, is not considering race in the decisions that you make and actually recognizing that people are the sum of their choices, that they are not, they're not the sum of their skin color, that we don't need to make judgments of people based on how they look and what the hue of their skin is.
I don't want a Black History Month. Black history is American history.
How are we going to get rid of racism until...
Stop talking about it. I'm going to stop calling you a white man.
Yeah.
And I'm going to ask you to stop calling me a black man. I know you as Mike Wallace. You know me as Morgan Freeman.
Then Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas responded, basically, calling Ketanji Brown Jackson a racist and saying that we are not the sum of our skin color, but that we are all individuals and that we are perfectly capable, regardless of what we look like, of achieving these things, of getting into places like Harvard and University of North Carolina without consideration of race. So he pretty much levels her with his response. I'm not going to go into all of it, but it's just astounding that, we have somebody on the Supreme Court who is supposed to, as in their position, it is the entire job of their position to just abide by the Constitution, to apply the Constitution in their rulings of the law. Yet Ketanji Brown Jackson only does so. She does everything against the Constitution. Everything is based on anything that goes against how the Constitution was written. And it's clear in the way that she responds to these things. So it's not surprising. And then there is Joe Biden, who responded exactly the way that we believed that he would, in saying that affirmative action, that people don't understand that affirmative action is not racist. And then he goes on to explain that, why it's racist. And this is from Tim Young's account. So Tim actually interjects his own little things here, but let's just have a listen really quick.
With the court's decision. Because affirmative action is so misunderstood, I want to be clear, make sure everybody's clear about what the law has been.
Oh, thank God old Joe's here to explain it to us. He's gonna explain to everybody. Hold on.
Many people wrongly believe that affirmative action allows unqualified students to be admitted ahead of qualified students. This is not how college admissions work.
No, that's exactly what it is, based on race. Yeah, unqualified based on race. Get overqualified people based on race.
Rather, colleges set out standards for admission, and every student has to meet those standards. Then and only then, after first meeting the qualifications required by the school, do colleges look at other factors in addition to their grades, such as race.
And there it is. It's based on race, so it's racist. Thanks for explaining that, Joe. Affirmative action is racist.
And then I wanted to just share this clip, and this is between a contributor or a anchor, I don't know, what do you call people on news organizations these days, from Abby D. Phillip, who works for CNN. So, that will set the bar right there about what we can expect to hear, talking to this gentleman named Kenny Zhu, who is the board member of Students for Fair Admissions, and talking about the harm that affirmative action has caused. And she ends the segment pretty abruptly because this guy brings facts, and we can't have facts on CNN. But I found this interaction really interesting. So let's have a listen.
So, I mean, colleges, obviously they care about grades and SAT scores, but they also are filling universities of people, human beings who have other factors that they bring to the table. Why is it not okay for them to consider those things?
I'm saying if you're going to consider those things, you should consider them without respect to race.
Sure.
So as you know, a lot of Asian Americans...
I think that's exactly right, but socioeconomic status doesn't... If you take race out of it, let's call it socioeconomic status, where whether or not they grew up wealthy or poor.
So is she making being black and brown skinned synonymous with being poor? Because that kind of sounds like what she's saying to me.
is that not something that colleges might have an interest in considering?
Also, it's completely disingenuous to assume that it's just wealthy kids that get into Harvard and University of North Carolina. There's a lot of kids that work their butts off to get into these schools and rise above their circumstances in life and rise above their socioeconomic status. Yet, for some reason, people like Abby D. Phillip don't seem to think that Black and brown kids are capable of doing that, despite the fact that numerous other students in these institutions manage to do that for themselves. So, again.
The reason why you shouldn't consider that is because you should consider the success of an applicant. Because of affirmative action, Black Americans graduate from law school at the bottom 25% of their classes, largely speaking. And we don't want that. We want Black students to succeed. We want every student to succeed, low-income students to succeed. But you have to put them in scenarios, in places where they're likely to succeed.
Well, and it's interesting that he says this because, you know, if Abby D. Phillip hears that, she's probably thinking that Black kids are ending up in the bottom 25% of their law classes because of racism. But the fact is, if you are putting them in a situation that they haven't been prepared for, and you're putting them in there because of their skin color, but they may not have the grades that their classmates have, then they're not going to succeed because you've lowered the standards, you know, all along the way up until they get to this point, and you haven't expected them to reach the standard that is required to get into Harvard for everybody else. So you're putting them in a scenario where suddenly those special exceptions are not being made for them anymore, and then they're expected to perform at the exact same level as people that did have the grades to get in there. But that's not to say that they can't get those grades. It's that people like Abby Phillips don't want to talk about correcting all of the problems that got them to this place, you know, all of the problems that happened in the first 18 years of their life, whether it be, you know, a poor school or, you know, not being expected to perform at this level, or, you know, SAT and ACT scores that he is going to go into. But again, you know, having lower expectations the first 18 years of their life, and then, you know, putting them in a place where now they're expected to perform at the same level. So it's just, yeah.
And lowering your standard to admit somebody of a socioeconomic status or race would not help them do that. In fact, it would harm their graduation rate and excellence.
Well, as the case also points out, the standard isn't necessarily lowered because students are all admitted. The question is whether race can be an added consideration, a tipping point in some of these cases.
The standard is lowered. The standard is lowered as the student premier admissions data shows. An Asian has to score 273 points higher on the SAT to have the same chance of admission as a Black person. So the standard is lowered for Black Americans.
Kenny Xu, thank you.
Oh, we've got to end the segment because he's starting to bring data and facts, and we can't have that. But it's true. Asian students have to score significantly higher to get into these schools. But again, as I just said, they're making all of these exceptions along the way, saying that you only have to reach this score to get into the school. We're lowering it, and you're telling these Black kids that they can't reach the same standard or the same scores as someone that's Asian and then have the same outcome where they're going to get into Harvard. So we're going to have two separate standards for them to meet the criteria that they're creating based on race, and then we're going to put you in an institution where now the standards are the same. And I've also heard a statistic, I can't remember the exact number, but these kids that are getting into places like Harvard, when the standard was lower for them to get in, they end up not graduating or not completing their degree because it gets to be so frustrating and so difficult for them. So what they're doing here is setting these kids up to fail. And then when they do, people like Abby D. Phillip will come out and be like, it's because of racism. It's because America is a systemically racist country. And it's like, well, how about we start improving the lives of your community the first 20 years of their life, and then we can start to see those disparities lessened. But again, they're reacting exactly the way that we would expect them to react. And let's not forget that the woke has redefined the word racism. It means that white people are inherently racist and there's nothing that they can do about it. And just by nature of the color of our skin, we can't help but oppress Black people. It's just something that we do. We can't help it. And by nature of Black people and their skin color, they can't help but be oppressed. They need all of these special exceptions and these special laws to elevate them because they aren't capable of performing at the rate as lighter skinned peers, which is which is racism. And this is also a very pro-slavery message. This is psychological slavery. When you're constantly telling somebody that they need all of these exceptions to succeed because they're not going to succeed without them, then you are psychologically enslaving them and beating them down so that they don't have that motivation and that hope and that belief in themselves to work hard and to achieve the same thing as their peers that have lighter skin than they do. And in this case, the psychological slaveholders are people like Ketanji Brown Jackson and Barack Obama and Joe Biden, who consistently put these messages out there telling them that they aren't good enough just because of how they were born, and eliminating that hope and stripping them of their opportunities to succeed because they're beating them down so that they don't even try to succeed. And it's really unfortunate because those messages are completely anti-American and anti-constitutional. It is the privilege of being in America that you don't have to be born into success to have success. You don't have to be born into wealth to have wealth. You don't have to be born a specific skin color to have certain opportunities. Yes, there are people that are wealthy that are, their kids are born into wealth, but being born into wealth is not a stipulation of achieving wealth or having wealth in your life. Basically, the only criteria that you need to meet in America to have the kind of success that Barack Obama has had or Ketanji Brown Jackson has had is to be a human being. And the saddest and the most infuriating thing about messages from people like Miss Jackson or Obama is that they have a platform where they could be telling these young people that they're capable of anything, that they could be a Supreme Court justice, that they could be the president of the United States. And instead they use their platform to tell these kids that they are less than, that if they don't put these policies in place, that they're going to be stuck in the situation that they're in, and that it's because of these systemically racist things that are going on that they never have any hope of succeeding unless, the people in power pave the way for them. It's just sad that, they have the choice to uplift these kids and they actively choose not only not uplift them, but to beat them down with these messages of being inferior. If they really cared about the Black community, they would be addressing the issues that are holding teenagers back, that are really causing the issues in their lives. They would be advocating for better schools and better teachers and better skills training and better, training in work ethic. They would be advocating for present fathers in the home and two-parent families, and they would be telling women in these communities that you need to have a higher standard for yourself and be with somebody who's going to be there for your kids, and that they would be telling men in this community that you need to stick around and raise your kids and be a man and step up, so that gangs aren't raising these kids, or that people on the streets aren't being there as their parental figures because they don't have parents in the home that are taking care of them. And clearly, I'm not saying that that's across the board for all Black families. Clearly that's not the case, but statistically they have a much higher single parent rate in their families, and because these kids don't have strong parental figures, they end up on the streets in situations where whoever they meet becomes their family, and that becomes the influence in their life. Not to mention the highest rate of death for young Black men is Black on Black homicide. So again, there's all of these things that if they really cared about the Black community and wanting to make sure that they, succeed and that they can get into Harvard and University of North Carolina and have a career and change and turn things around for their life, they would want to fix all of these other things before they get to that college application. But they consistently show that that's not what they want to do because they benefit from having people that need them to succeed. It's why they emulate the worst people in the Black community. It's why they put people like George Floyd on a mural, or they put Jordan Neely in a golden casket, because they take people that have the worst track record and criminal history and say this is who we want you to look to as an example of how to live your life. To me, that is the greatest indicator of how much they want these kids to not believe in themselves and to not overcome their circumstances, when they put people, you know, as their idols in this community that are really just not good human beings, because it's not like they don't have good people to look up to that they could put as murals or in golden caskets or as statues in their community. It's not like they don't have anybody to choose from. They actively choose the people that they want these kids to emulate. As we've seen, I don't know if I have the clip right here. We've seen numerous things like this happening, where they've had thousands of teenagers just going into the streets and just destroying the place. And this is happening more and more, but you're not going to hear anything about this from Ketanji Brown Jackson or Barack Obama or Joe Biden. They don't want to point to these things and say, hey, let's solve this problem. Let's get these people off the streets. Let's hold people accountable and say that you can't just go in and trash your city and not face any consequences for it. They're just letting this stuff happen. And then they're like, well, if they can't get into Harvard, it's because of racism. It's like, you don't care about anything else that is happening in these communities and the crime that is rising, and, you know, the things that people are facing, and, you know, the numerous businesses that have had to close up shop in places like California and Chicago and Seattle, and have had to take their jobs and their products out of that area because of the rampant looting and theft and criminal activity. So again, they don't care, but they want to be able to use something like affirmative action and keep that in place so that they can point to something and see, look how much we care, look how much we're trying to help you, look how much we're trying to save you. And people that take this away from you are the ones that are trying to harm you, which is completely ridiculous. So let me know your thoughts on this in the comments below. I would love to hear all of your takes on this issue. And I just want to make it abundantly clear. I want these kids to succeed. I want them to have better lives. I don't want to see their communities descending into this chaos. I want people who have the power to do so to address these issues and to say, you deserve better. Let's create better for you, instead of just ignoring all of these problems and then pretending to care, you know, when they get to the point where they're filling out a college application. Like, it's infuriating, because they do deserve better. These kids all deserve better, but you won't hear it from these kind of Supreme Court justices who say that we need affirmative action, or, you know, they're not going to succeed. It's like, how about we start addressing all these other problems? So like this video, leave your thoughts in the comments below. If you feel so inclined, hit the little thanks button and support the channel through a small donation. Otherwise, I will see you in the next one. Bye.